Okay, so thank you all for joining us today. We are back on schedule. We're back on regular schedule. There's not going to be many interruptions, maybe here and there some schedule conflict, right? But overall, there's consecutive holidays one after another like we just had. So we are, Mirz Hashem, we're going to be going and starting. Hey guys, thanks for joining us. We literally just started, so perfect timing. So we're going to start now with Parshah Noach, and Parshah Noach is the second parsha of on page 30. Page 30, yeah, page 30. Page 30. Now, Parshah Noach is the second parsha of the Torah. The first parsha is Bereshis. We didn't really have an opportunity this year to talk about Bereshis because Bereshis fell out this year, the Shabbos, right after Simchas Torah. We didn't really have an opportunity to do that. So I just want to touch a few things about Bereshis, and then we'll go into Noach, which sort of really ties in. But I think it's important just to touch a few things about Bereshis. Bereshis is jam-packed. You could give a whole series on Bereshis. You could spend years on Bereshis. Right, but we're just going to touch on just a few core and important things about Bereshis, and then we'll go into Noah. So the commentaries, we're not going to go. I'm not going to go through the Chumash on that because, as I said, we're just going to talk a few overall things. There's a few overall things about Bereshis. Number one, as we know, it's Genesis. It means to say the creation of the world. God created the world in 6 days. The seventh day He rests. He created Adam on the 6th day. Just a quick recap: Adam and Eve. God creates Eve from Adam. Right? God told Adam to call all the animals names, and he realized he doesn't have a pair, so he realized that he needs a pair, and he created Eve from Adam. Adam and Eve sinned from the Eitz Hadas, from the tree of life, the tree of wisdom. And what that tree exactly is, that's beyond the scope of today's recap quickly, right? But the Nachash, the snake, which is referring to the evil inclination, enticed Chava, got her to go ahead and to eat from the tree, and she got her husband to eat it, and that's brought death to the world. That brought pain, labor pain, and everything else, having to work and everything in between. Then it goes through Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava's children. Cain kills Hevel, right? It talks about his children. Then they have another kid, right? And then talks about his descendants, and then it leads to Noah. Just a few important things that we have to just quickly touch upon, and we're not going to have time to delve into, but just to touch upon regarding Parshas Bereshis. Parshas Bereshis really is a fundamental of our belief system. Right? There's every Shabbos we say, right? Vaychula Shamayim va'aretz. Right, and God sort of created the heaven and the earth. Right, and God rested on the seventh day. He completed and He rested on the seventh day. Shabbos represents the constant reminder that God is the one that created the world. Not didn't happen by itself. It didn't happen through molecules. It didn't happen through this. It didn't forever exist like some philosophers think. Right, there wasn't a billion years ago. The beginning of Genesis is just a reminder, and it's important to learn through it and to look at the right commentaries, the commentaries that we hold of how they explain it, right? Is really the foundation of our belief system. And it's something that always has to be repeated and always has to be reinforced, that we believe that our system of 7 days, the Kuzari says, why is it that everywhere in the world has a 7-day week? Right? You don't go anywhere in the world that's something that's universal. You don't have anywhere that says they have a 5-day week, they have a 6-day week, right? Different people have languages. We'll talk about that at the end of this week's parsha. Right? But what is it that everybody has a 7-day week, right? And says the Kuzari that's one of, not that we need a proof, but it's one of the proofs that there was one man, right? That God created with one man and all his descendants. That was something that just became so ingrained in him and his children because of the system of how God created the world, that He created in 6 days and He rested on the seventh day. And that's how God taught Adam of how the system of the weeks to be, right? That we rest on the seventh, that created a week system. But it was so ingrained in him and his children that was something that wherever you go, into some jungle in Africa, to Peru's in the Incas in Peru, and somewhere in India, wherever it is, and they all have this concept because this is something that created from one person that spread everywhere. That's just a something that is not taught in school. It's not something that's taught anywhere. That's just something that becomes part of the nature of your existence. And says the Kuzari that that's one of the proofs, if one needs a proof, that it has to be that there was one man, that everything comes from one man, and that God created the world. All right, so that's just one small thing to learn from the Parsha of Bereshis, is to reinforce our continuous belief, and it's something that we have to work on. It's a muscle. It's not something that just happens overnight. That belief that God created the world, and He continues to create the world. So that's just one idea that we have to think about from Parshas Bereshis. Now we're going to go into Noach. So Parshas Noach, Eila told us Noach, first verse, chapter 6, verse 9, says, Eila told us Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'doraso. Right? Noach, this is a descendants, told means descendants, the children of Noach. Noach ish tzaddik, Noach was a righteous person, right? Tamim was pure, right? B'doraso in his generation, as Elokim Salach Noach, Noach went with God. So there's a lot to digest and to dissect in this verse alone. I'm going to spend a few minutes just on this verse. Every verse has a tremendous amount, but I just want to break this verse down and to expand on it. So when I tell you, and when we saw, Eila told us Adam in last week's Torah portion, right? When it says these are the descendants of Adam, right? Or when it says these are descendants of Noah, and then it says they're kids, right? That's whenever told it means the descendants. What does the Torah? It says Eila told us Noach is tzaddik. Noach was a righteous person. It doesn't mention his children until much later, right? Much later it mentions his children. It doesn't mention his children right now. So why it only mentions his children not until chapter 7, right? That's when it mentions. It says that it says children in the next verse, but in last week's parsha, the end of the parsha, it mentions his children, right? It says in last week's parsha, Noach had his 3 children at the age of 600. Ben Chametz Mea Shana Yolad is Noach, right? 500 years old, right? Imagine that. At 500 years old, Noach had Shem, Cham, and Yafes, right? It mentions that in last week's parsha, right? But over here, when it says that these are the descendants of Noach, and it doesn't mention his kids, and it says Noach is tzaddik, Noach was a righteous person. So what is that? What's the Torah telling us? Does this say Noach is tzaddik, Noach was a righteous person? If you're not mentioning his descendants, don't say these are the descendants of Noach. So Ramosha Feinstein says something very powerful. We use Ramosha Feinstein very often. Ramosha Feinstein says something very powerful, and it's based off other commentaries also, that the Torah is trying to teach us an extremely important message, and Rashi alludes to this also, right? That what are the descendants of, what should our descendants really be? Our actions. Our actions are really define who we are, right? Eila told us Noach, these are the descendants. This is the descendants of Noach. What is the descendants? His actions, right? Yes, of course, his physical descendants are his children, but his actions. Noach is tzaddik. Noach was a righteous person. Who was Noach? How can you see if people know Noach is tzaddik? Noach was a righteous person. And so Elokim Salach Noach. Noach went with God, right? And that is really the Torah. That is really the offspring of Noach. That's really what you want. If you say, what's Noach? Noach's descent? Noach's actions are good, right? And that, or God forbid, it's the other way around, right? Actions are not good, right? So this is, says Ramosha Feinstein, something that we have to reflect about every time we're about to do something or not do something, right? We're asked to join a minyan. I know today those on the WhatsApp group, we need a minyan, right? What are your actions? Are you going to, hey, if you're able to, I'm in the middle of a good show. It's a Monday Night Football. It's not Monday night. It's Monday Night Football. I don't know, right? I'll daven later. I'll daven early. I'll daven in my house, right? And I'm not judging anybody, right? God forbid. That's not what we're doing. But we're just bringing out a point. Your actions are who you are. Your actions define who you are, right? So, told us Noach is tzaddik. Noach is a righteous person. That's one thing that we have to reflect on and think about from this week's parsha, and internalize into our daily lives. We want to be defined as good people. We want to be defined as Torah Jews. And so if we want to be defined as Torah Jews, as good people, then our actions have to follow suit. Our actions have to follow that. The next thing that we learn from this week's parsha, right, is from this verse alone. Noach ish tzaddik tamim. He was pure. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein. Something very powerful. I mentioned this. I mentioned this in Macharusa at Partners of Torah, which of course is very important to go to on Monday nights, right? And I mentioned this to him. I've seen this for many years. My father, I think, told me this for the first time. It's also Rav Moshe Feinstein. Tamim means pure. Right? That's what tamim means. Tamim means pure. We don't find that Avram Avinu is called tamim. We don't find that Avram Avinu, our father, the father of the Jewish people, right? The man of Chesed, tent with four doors to it. We don't find that he's called tamim. Why not? Right? If tamim means pure, it's a high level. Why not? Says Rav Moshe Feinstein something very important. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein that anybody that's involved in communal work, anybody that's involved in something that's important, right, is not going to be tamim, cannot be pure. What do you mean pure? It doesn't mean pure like in his actions. He says pure tamim, that's tzaddik, that's a righteous person. So what's tamim? Pure means to say that no one has any complaints against him. No one has anything bad to say about the person. That's a good thing, right? Well, wow, no one has anything bad to say about the person. But if you're in communal work, right? If you're on a board, if you're a rabbi, if you're a teacher, you're trying to help you're on some committees. There's always going to be someone that doesn't like what you have to say, right? Right? I think I got an amen on that one, right? There's always going to be someone that doesn't like what you have to say. And there's always going to be someone that's going to be upset in the direction that you're taking the shul. So therefore, Avram Avinu, as we know, Avram went ahead and he taught. Avram went and taught the masses, and he was open, and he reached out to people, and he was trying to bring people closer to God, and that's why he's called the father of monotheism. Noach believed in God. Why is it Noach the father of monotheism? Of course, he was just in himself he believed in God. Abraham was the father of monotheism, means to say the father of monotheism that was spreading the word of God, trying to change the world. So Torah says we can't put the word tamim, says Rav Moshe Feinstein. It's not a negative thing, right? It's not a negative thing, but we can't use the word tamim. But Noach, on the contrary, as Rashi explains to us, that Noach was a righteous person, but Noach at the same time, right, the rabbis have a little complaint against Noach on his level, of course, but something to learn from us. That we don't find that Noach ever went and rebuked the people. Right? He never went out. He never rebuked anybody. He just stayed next to his teva for 120 years. We'll talk about that in a minute. And for 120 years, and he was banging, right? He went to Lowe's, and I was talking to my kid, Ezzy, today. I said, oh, what do you learn? No, Parshah Noach, hey, Noach built a teva. I said, oh, where do you get the word from? I don't know, he just had it. I said, where do you get it from? Lowe's or Home Depot? Right? He said, no, Daddy. Right? But Noach was building his teva. Right? So it's important to remember that even though Avraham Avinu did not get the name Tamim, right? But regarding what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God wants us to do, who did God choose that the Jewish people should come from? Who is known as the father of monotheism? Avraham Avinu, right? Because that's what we have to. We have to make sure that we're out there, and we'll talk more about this when we speak about Parshas about Avraham Avinu, right? But we have to make sure that we're out there. We have to fight in a healthy way. We have to ensure the success of our synagogue, of our schools, of our community, of our family, that it's going in the Torah way. And yes, you might unfortunately rub some people the wrong way. And you try to be as gentle, as nice as possible. Right? We're not talking about to be mean, right? But even when you're being as gentle and nice as possible, unfortunately, sometimes you might rub someone the wrong way. And the Torah is telling us that was Avraham Avinu. Yes, but we have to do that. Right? We cannot be a Noach on this point, right? We got to do that. We got to go out and we got to make sure, that we keep our shul and our schools and our family going in the Torah way, right? Even if it might rub someone the wrong way a little bit. So that's another idea. The other thing is, it says b'doroso, right? Tamim haya b'doroso, in his generation. The commentators want to know, like, what else? Like, why does the Torah have to? We know there's not an extra word in the Torah, so why does the Torah have to say b'doroso in his generation? Should have said, Eila told us Noach, Noach is Tzaddik, Tamim, right? Eselokim Shalach Noach. He was pure and with God and Noach went. Why does you have to say Bidoroso, in his generation? So, so the commentaries, Rashi brings down two opinions in the Talmud. One opinion is that in his generation, right, he was a tzaddik. Imagine if you would have been in Avram Avinu's generation. Imagine if you would have been in the generation of Moshe. Imagine if you would have been in a generation where there are other righteous people. How much greater you would have been, because you would have had other people to converse with and to grow with. Right? So even in his generation, he was great. Other commentaries say a little different. They say, but the Rosa in his generation, only in his generation was he considered a tzaddik. But if he would have been in the generation of someone else, Avram or whatever, right, then he would have been considered a tzaddik, right? Right? Based off how bad everybody else was, he was considered a tzaddik, right? But if he would have been in a different generation, then not necessarily would have been considered tzaddik. So we have to understand, right, that these two explanations is something. It's not just okay. It's a nice catchy word or whatever. We have to take both explanations to heart. The Talmud is telling us these two explanations, and Rashi decides to quote it, right, these two explanations, because there's something deep that we have to learn from these two explanations. What is that? So we always have to double check ourselves. Number one, we have to give ourselves encouragement that even in our generation, right, in our situation, and not necessarily our generation, in our situation, how I grew up, right, the people that I have, the education that I have, or whatever level that you're doing, if it's keeping Shabbos, if it's eating kosher, if it's, coming to synagogue once a week, wherever you're holding, give yourself a pat on the back and say, wow, look, I'm doing this, right, even with what I've done or where I've grown or what I've done, right, I'm still doing this, right? If I would have had more opportunity, I could have done more, right? You could always do more, right? You could always do more. But at this stage, to give yourself a little pat on the back and say, you know what? I'm good. I could do more because I'm good, right? But on the other hand, we can't let it get to our head. We have to say, yes, because of how you grew and whatever it is, your surroundings, that's why you consider. But if you would be, somewhere else and grow, being in this same situation, that won't necessarily be considered righteous. It won't necessarily. So we have to look at both things, the two sides of a coin, to encourage us to constantly grow. You know what? I have to try to be where I'll be righteous or doing the right thing, and whatever community I'm in, or wherever I am, right? Wherever it is that I am, I have to try. I don't want to just be righteous just because the people that are around me are not as righteous as I am, right? And I want to be righteous even in other places. So it's an encouragement to grow. But on the other hand, don't put yourself down. It's something to be righteous in this community, in this thing, because there's so many things that are pulling you, right, away from doing the right thing. Wherever one's holding, it doesn't make a difference where they're holding. They could be in a religious community. I always say, everybody thinks that they're in the middle road, right? There's always more people that are firmer than you, and there's more people that are not firmer than you. And there's always going to be someone that's more religious than you, right? You can't say, oh, I'm the most religious. Right? There's always I'm the least religious. There's always someone less religious than you, right? So you always have where to grow, and unfortunately where to fall. And that's what the Torah is telling us. These two explanations are telling us that this is something that we always have to reflect on, right? Of these two ideas, to constantly remind ourselves to grow and to change ourselves. Right? So this is this one verse we just spoke. There's more even to this verse, and we could go deeper. It's always important to remember that Torah is so deep and there's so much in the Torah, right? But we're just trying to take out just some things for us. Want to say something? Anybody? Okay. So let's move on. So I wanna jump a little bit. Right? The Torah tells us, why did God create the Mabul? Why did he do the Mabul? So the verse says, right? The world, right? The earth would become corrupt, right, in front of God, and the world became full of chametz. Chametz is robbery, stealing, right? It's theft. That's what chametz is. Right? So the commentators want to know, why was chametz pointed out, right? Why was that the thing that was robbery? It says there's immorality going on. There was adultery. There was this. So it was terrible, right? It was terrible. Even from the last week's parsha, we know that the end of last week's parsha, some angels came down into the world and had relationships with women and created the giants, and it was terrible. And not only that, if you look at the next verse, it says, "Vayar Elokim es haaretz v'hinei nishchasha," the whole world became corrupt. Right? Kehishchas kol basar, all living creatures. It says animals. It says everybody, everything became right from its darkei al haaretz, from its proper way on the land. Even to the extent that we know that it says that 3 inches, 3 tvachim of the earth sort of got wiped away because the earth was seeped with immorality, with this the wrong way of living. So why was Hamas, robbery, singled out? From all these terrible things, other things could have been singled. Why was robbery singled out? Commentaries point out, many of them point out, that the reason why robbery was pointed out is because robbery is something that goes from one camp to the other camp. We know there's 2 categories of mitzvot. There's ben adam lechavero, ben adam lemakom, between man and his fellow, and between man and God. Right? They're all the same level of mitzvah, right? But there's 2 sort of categories, right? Giving chesed, helping someone out, is ben adam lechavero. Saying lashon hara, speaking evil, is ben adam lechavero. Right? Shaking a lulav and esrog, saying a sukkah, is ben adam lemakom. Right? Sort of the different categories of mitzvot. Stealing is ben adam lemakom. It's also, God tells you not to steal, right? But stealing also is ben adam lechavero. Mostly, it seems like it's ben adam lechavero because you're taking from someone else. But since the commentaries that someone that steals, right, is really all averos have this to a certain degree, but especially one that steals, it has a foundation in ben adam lemakom, between man and God. Meaning to say what? Because why would someone steal? If someone believed in God, and believed that whatever he has is meant for him, and God is the one that gives everything out, and what God wants him to have, that's what he's supposed to have. So if someone truly has that level of belief, then he would never go ahead and steal from anybody else, right? He won't hurt anybody. He won't steal from anybody else, because why am I going to go take? Why am I jealous of what the other person? Why do I want the other person? That's not what God wants me to have. I have to go work, and after this, and if I'm successful, I mean, God wants me to have it. If unfortunately I'm not successful, so then, if God forbid the stock market crashes and I lose everything, yes, I'm upset and I'm sad, but that's not what God wants me to have right now. So the foundation, even though it's been adam lechaver, between man and his fellow, the foundation of the avera has really been adam lemakom, really between man and God, of having a lack of faith in that God really controls the world. Right? And therefore, the Torah picks this one out specifically, is saying that really it's a lesson to really everything, even every ben adam lechavero, right? Giving charity, being friendly to someone, saying a kind word to someone, not speaking lashon hara. Every ben adam lechavero, every mitzvah between man and his fellow. If someone has a strong ben adam lemakom, if someone builds up their ben adam belief in their God, and that God is the one that runs the world, then ben adam lechaver will be considered second nature. Why not? Of course, be nice to someone else, right? We're all equal. It doesn't make a difference. I was born into kingship. I was born to a wealthy family and not a wealthy family. It doesn't make a difference, right? We're all the children of God. Right? Of course, I'm going to give my 10% because that's what God wants me to give. Right? God's the one that gave me what I have, and He tells me to give 10%. And of course, I'll give it. Of course, I'll help someone else out, because so when one builds their ben adam lechavera, ben adam lemakom, then everything else will fall into place. And that's why the Torah picks this one to tell us that really the bottom line of the dar Mabul, the generation of Mabul, how it became so immoral, and something that we're struggling with in our generation too, right? Became so immoral is because the concept of godliness, the concept of God, is gone. There's no concept. There was no concept of God. There's no concept of serving, even though they serve their idols, but means they can pick whatever God they want. Again, that's also a lack of belief in one God. Right? It's a lack of it, and therefore the Torah is telling us that that's something that we have to constantly strengthen. If we strengthen our ben adam lemakom, if we strengthen between our relationship with our Father in heaven, right, then all the other mitzvot, whatever they are, right, will be. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, because the inclination is always going to have a struggle with us, right? The Yetzer Hara is always going to try to get us not to do the right thing, but it will be easier to fall into place because we're building our Ben Adam L'Makom. So we have to build everything, of course, but we always have to remind ourselves, and this is a great place to bring this point out, is that the more we work on our relationship with our Father in heaven, the more we build that muscle up, right, the more it will be easier to overcome our other challenges, and especially the ones of Ben Adam L'Chaver, man and his fellow. Any questions or comments? No? Okay, good. So let's move on. Okay, so we're going to skip a little bit. There's a lot of good in this week's parsha, and we even touch the rest. So we're going to skip to chapter 8, to chapter 8, verse 22. Before we go there, I just sort of going to give a quick recap on what's going on. So Noach goes into the Teva. God tells him to go into the Teva, right? It says that the length of the Teva, how big the Teva was. Right? I mentioned before that it took Noach 120 years. We know that from sort of the age when he had his kids. So he went in, right? 120 years. It took him to build the Teva. And why did it take him so long, right? You say, I don't know, because he didn't have power drills, right? 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 No, so why did God want it? Because God is merciful. God was hoping that if people come to Noach or to go and say, what are you doing? God's going to build a flood, right? So hopefully they'll repent. Right? And even up to the last minute, right? God was waiting for them to repent, right? But they didn't take notice or they didn't care, right? But God was willing to wait 120 years. Again, now remember, at that time they lived 900 years, right? So it was it could be like, 50 years in our life or 40 years in our life, right? But God wanted to give them time, and God is merciful, waiting for them to repent, and that's something to constantly remember. And then it speaks about going into the Teva. It says that God told Noach to go into the Teva, right? And all the animals to go into the Teva. There was 2 pairs of animals, of the non-kosher animals, 7 of the kosher animals. And that was because for sacrifices, and these were the animals that stayed pure. Right, all the other animals that did not stay pure, they intermingled with other species, right, and they did not stay pure, right, and that's why they were also wiped out. The flood was for 40 days and 40 nights, right. It goes and tells you that it landed, covered all the water covered everything, right, and then it tells you that it landed on Ararat, right. Some say that that's not Everest, some say it's somewhere in India. Tibet, I'm not sure exactly. There's different things of where it was exactly, right? But it had landed on that mountain. It's considered one of the highest. It is now one of the highest, but whatever. And then it says that Noach sent birds out, first a raven and then a Yonah, right? The raven came back. The Yonah didn't come back after the 3rd time, right? And there's a lot of mystical things about which bird he took and what the Yonah represents, and came back with an olive branch that really is from Gan Eden, right? There's a lot of mystical things and a lot of things to talk about. We don't have time today to go into this, right? I just wanted to bring that out. And then it says, and then the end over here, and sort of the end of this chapter, says it says how deep the table was, and that's the end of this chapter. Then chapter 8, we're on page 36 right now. Right, chapter 8. The chapter starts off with Vayiskar Lakim as Noach. God remembered Noach. So sort of just going back a little bit, and he made the waters go down, right? And that's when in this chapter, that's when it speaks about the birds going back and forth, right? And then it says that Vayisar es Noach Teva. Noach went out of the Teva, right? And we're up to verse 15, right? God speaks to Noach, says the Teva commands him to go out of the Teva, and he tells him and his children, he says to populate the world and all the animals, right, to go out, right? And then it says that Noach made Ace, even Noach Mizbech, Noach built the Mizbech, and he brought sacrifices, and it says that God smelled the sacrifices, and now we're on page 40, right? And he said, Ki yetzer lev adam ra min urayev, right? He knows that a person has bad from his upbringing, means to say that he doesn't have a yetzer tov yet, right? And that's where God promises that he's not going to destroy man like he just did, right? And then there's a very interesting verse. Verse 22, it says like this, Ad kol yemei haaretz zarva katzir, right? V'kor v'chom v'kayitz v'chorif yom v'layla lisposu. The goes to the Torah goes ahead and tells you that there'll be a continuous days of the earth. Right? There'll be harvest, there'll be cold, there'll be heat, there'll be summer and winter, day and night. Right? So not cease. That will happen, and all the four seasons. The Seporna says something very interesting. Seporna lived probably about 1300, somewhere like that. And Seporna on the commentary over here says something very interesting. Remember, he lived in 1300s. He says that what is the Torah telling us? There's harvest, and there's cold, and there's heat, there's summer and winter, right? What's the Torah telling us about all these things? Like, thank you. Like, okay, we knew that. Like, that's four seasons. Says the Seporna something fascinating. He says that before the Mabul, listen to this, right? Before the Mabul, for the flood, there's no four seasons. Yeah. He says before, and he'll explain you why. Remember when he lived also. He said before the Mabul, there was no four seasons. He said everything was perfect. The world, the sun was hitting the world perfectly in all aspects. He said, and he says why? He says because the four seasons come from the world being on an axis. Being on an axis, right? The world being on an axis. We know that that's true. He lived in somewhere in the late 1200s, early 1300s, before they officially knew the world was round or whatever, right? This is what the Seporna says. He says because when the world's on an axis, right, this doesn't hit the sun always in the same direction, and that's why you have days and nights, longer days and longer nights. You have winter, and you have because being closer to the sun, away from the sun, and you have different seasons. He says before the Mabul, right? It was perfect. It wasn't summer, it wasn't winter. It was probably like it was like San Francisco and San Diego or San Diego. Thank you. It's like San Diego, like almost perfect weather, right? Almost like perfect weather. And he said, and that's one of the reasons why the world got so bad was because there was never change. Everything was perfect. They became so complacent, and they became and they thought they were godly. Nothing's ever bad. There's never ever a bad one. It never rained. The Kuzari speaks about this. It never rained during the day. It only rained at night, right? It never rained during the day, right? You like that, right? Right? The Talmud tells us, right, in that when it says b'chukosai telechu, it says if you go in God's ways in Parshas b'chukosai, when it's sati gishma b'itam, I'll put rain in its proper time. The Talmud tells us in Tractate Tainus, and Rashi quotes it, that's at night, right? It's at night. Gishma b'itam is referring to night, right? Because then it doesn't mud the roads, it doesn't stop people from going out, right? Even nowadays, it's in the hard terrain, you have to walk or whatever. It's at night. That's Gishma b'itam, because that's how God originally created the world. The world is perfect. So people, and that's the connection. Said Rabbi and Rabbi, they think they're godly. There's no illness, there's no nothing. That's why they lived so long, because the quality of the world was perfect. It was a perfect world. It was like a utopia of perfection, right? And therefore, they thought they were God. They thought they could do whatever they want, and they strayed from God. So the Mabul, one of the reasons why God could have destroyed the world in any way, right? He wanted. But one of the reasons, right, God created it with water is because the weight of the water, right, tilted the world. God, of course, wanted this, right, but tilted the world to be on an axis. And now that the world's on an axis, right, now there's four seasons, right? Now there's four seasons, and that's what this verse is telling us. He says, right, Ad kol yimei haaretz, right? All the days of the world there'll be these seasons. There'll be seed time, there'll be harvest, there'll be cold, there'll be heat, there'll be summer and winter, right? There'll be these different seasons, and now that there'll be these different seasons, the world will have a change. And it won't be summer all the time. It won't be you're gonna have to go, and at night, early nights. What are you gonna do? You're gonna hang out in the park. You're gonna hang out, whatever. No, come to shul, come to learn, go to this, open up something. Right? Things change. Your life has changed, and we know that our season changes up, and we're not just in a continuous staying in one way. Right? That's what the Seporna says. Now, first of all, it's mind-boggling because he lived in late 1200s, early 1300s, but they didn't even know about this stuff yet, right? But that's not surprising because everything's hidden in the Torah. If you know enough Torah, everything's hidden in the Torah, right? But it's just it's unbelievable, right? Just how this idea that when things have no change, we stray, right? We stray. I don't know if we talked about this in a sermon. I definitely talked about this in the past, but that's why one of the reasons why the Jewish people follow the moon. Right? Why did God choose us to follow the moon? Right? Why not the sun? Why can't we have Rosh Chodesh, the new calendar year of the sun? Right? Whatever that would mean, right? There isn't really, but why do our calendar work with the moon, right? So one of the reasons is because it's Chodesh. Chodesh, what's Chodesh mean? Rosh Chodesh. What is Chadash? It means new, right? Rosh Chodesh, the new. It's the head of the new. Chodesh means month, but Chodesh also means Chadash, new. It's a new beginning. Every month, God wants us to remember that we're like the moon. We have ups and we have downs, and doesn't make a difference where we're holding. If we've been doing good, unfortunately, we have to keep going good because we could lose that. Right? We shouldn't be complacent. And if we weren't doing so well, we could always start over again. Every month is telling us that even if the moon's completely gone, it's going to be coming right back. We can start all over again. There's nothing ever stopping us from just saying we're just going to stay in the way we are. And that's one of the reasons why, same idea, right, that Hashem wanted us to follow the moon, right? That's Chodesh, Chadash, it's new. We have to follow that, right? And that's what the Kuzari is telling us. Now, just to tie this in, right? In the next few verses, it says that God is going to tell that what's going to be my covenant with man, right? And I'll put a rainbow in the sky, right? That's what we know, rainbow, right? I remember we even though rainbows are beautiful, right? But in some places, rainbow is considered a good luck charm, especially for Irish people with their pot of gold, right? But in Judaism, right, rainbow is not a good thing, right? It's not a good thing. Why? Because whenever there's a rainbow in the sky, it means to say that God, we're not doing well. It's hey, hello. It's a reminder God really wanted to destroy the world, right? So, this bad storm, whatever it is, hell, wake up, right? God wanted to destroy every time there's a rainbow. And that's what the Talmud tells us in the days of, I forgot who it was, one of the rabbis of the Mishnah. It says in his lifetime there was never a rainbow. In his merit, because of his merit, he was such a great rabbi, there was never a rainbow. So the commentaries ask, right, something very interesting, sort of ties into this theme that we're talking about right now. Everything is in the Torah, everything's hidden in the Torah. And so the commentaries ask, said, 1 second. So it sounds like God created this new creation of Keshet, of a rainbow, right? They said, if next, my covenant's going to be that there's going to be a rainbow in the sky. Right, but we know King Solomon said, and we know this, right? Ein chadas tachas haaretz, there's nothing new under the sun. Means to say, after God sealed the creation of the world in last week's Torah portion, right? After God finished the creation of the world, there was nothing new created. Even God didn't create. Everything that has come forth from then is all hidden in the creation. Yes, even this laptop right here, and this phone, and the technology that we have that we're sending to space, right? And self-driving taxis, and whatever you want, right? It's all the technology and everything is hidden within the realm of the world. We're just tapping into it and finding it. Right? There's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new. So how could it be that there's a new creation happening in Parshah Noach, a rainbow? Right? That's what the people ask. So there's various different answers. But the Kuzari answers something so powerful and along the lines that we're saying right now. Says the Kuzari, that of course God created the concept of a rainbow in the 6 days of creation. But what's the science of a rainbow? The science of a rainbow is that it rains, right? And then it stops raining, the sun comes out, and then the sun hits the molecules of rain that are still somewhat like the moist in the sky, right? So when the sun hits that, right, that creates the ray of the sun goes through that, and that creates the rainbow. He says, but we established, and we just said that also from the Sephorna, right, that before the Mabul, the world is perfect. And if the world is perfect, that we just said that when is Gishmit and when's rain in its proper time? Only at night. So if it only rained at night, and so there was never a rainbow in the sky during the day. Right? So of course God created the concept of rainbow. Right? But there's never, and it could be that if you went to a waterfall, there was a rainbow, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with looking at the rainbow in Niagara Falls. And there's nothing wrong with that, or any other big waterfall that creates mist and there's a rainbow. That's not what it's referring to. It says, "Nasati kesher bas shamayim." I'm going to put a rainbow in the sky, right? I'm going to put a rainbow in the sky, right? Because that is going to be the covenant. Right? Only when it's coming from the rain, from the sky, that is where we find that the covenant is. Right? Not just a rainbow that's from a waterfall or something like that. That's not what it's referring to. And there's nothing wrong with it. Could be there was. Right? But that's what it's referring to. Right? And it's kashti nasati ba'anan. Right? The verse says like this. Page 42, verse 13. It's kashti nasati ba'anan. The rainbow I will is kashti, my rainbow nasati ba'anan I will put in the clouds. It's clear, it's in the clouds, right? Not from a waterfall or anything like that. In the clouds. Right? Now, before that, there was no cloud. There was perfect. Could be there was a cloud, but it wasn't rain clouds. It was perfect. Right? So again, along these same lines, right, that the Kuzari answers this question, right? That of course it was there, right? But there was no opportunity for it to come out. And that when God changed, the Mabul changed, and we could add the support that the world shifted, or if you don't go to that extreme, right? But God now made it that the world is not perfect anymore, right? In that way, and now it rains during the day, right? So therefore there'll be rainbows in the sky. So I find this fascinating on many fronts. Number one, it answers a very logical answer. Number two, it always mind boggles me, and it shouldn't mind boggle me, because again, as I said, everything's hidden in the Torah. But it's always so beautiful. Let's rephrase it. It's always so beautiful to see when we see these early commentaries that way ahead of the game in science and meta, whatever it is, and they're talking about things that they haven't discovered years later of why these things happen, right? And they talk about it and they explain the Torah that way, because everything is just a reinforcement for us, not that it needs to be for us, reinforcement that everything's hidden in the Torah. Right, and the Torah is a beacon for everything, right? So those are just a few more things that I want to add. Let's move on, because another whole part for this week's parsha. Right. So then after that it speaks about Noach. Right, they came out of Teva. Right, and it speaks about Noach planting a vineyard. Right, and he drank from it, and he became drunk. Right, and then it speaks about the story of his son Ham, doing a not nice act, right, and the other two sons covering him up, and then it says Noach cursed Ham, right, and he blessed Shem and Sheish, and says Sheish will be in the tents of Aver will be in the tents of Shem, right, Shem Ham and Yafes will be in the tents of Shem, right, and then that's sort of, and it says how old Noach was, and then it speaks about the children of Noach. So just one point on this thing, the commentators want to know, right? The Talmud tells us that they say that was a bad thing. It was not a good thing that Noach planted a vineyard first, right? He should have planted wheat. He should have planted like other things. Why did he plant a vineyard first, right? So it's sort of considered against him a little bit. So I saw this interesting explanation that Noach planted a vineyard first because there's positive. We could make kiddush, right? We sanctify things with wine, right? If we don't have wine, so yes, wine could be used to get drunk, right? And to be low and do bad things when you're drunk, right? Or wine could be used also for something great, kiddush and sanctifying. Chasana, we have a wine, or Shabbos, we always have wine. That's what you have. Havdalah, we use, right? So Noach thought, and now that the Mabul happened, that's only him and his family, that everybody was perfect, and it's going to be a utopia again. And therefore, I should build wine, right, that we could sanctify the world with it, right? But he didn't. He forgot, or he didn't realize that just because God brought the Mabul and wiped out all the evil people, they're still bad in the world, right? And therefore, first you have to have lechem. You have to have sustenance. Lechem refers to the Torah. Torah refers to the mitzvos. First, we have to build ourselves up, and then we could go ahead and plant the wine, right? The things that are a little more could go either way, right? And that's a lesson in our also growth, that sometimes we want to jump to do things that, yeah, I'm going to do this, maybe, and then it's things that could swing either way, right? You could swing either way. It could like be great, and if you do it properly, whatever, it's unbelievable, and you grow tremendously. But if God forbid it doesn't work the way it is, and you get upset and this and that, and then it could, God forbid, on the contrary, it's I'm never coming to shul. I'm not doing this. Right? You have to, so we have to build ourselves up. Like I tell my kids when I was building blocks with them, right? Not primarily with my son Ezzy. My 17-year-old doesn't build blocks with me anymore, right? And she hears this, will probably kill me for saying that, right? But because he's a teenager, right? So whatever I say, she'll kill me anyway. And she's a teenager, so she's not listening to my classes anyway. So I'm okay, right? But when you build something with blocks or whatever it is, or even you have to have a solid foundation, right? I tell them, let's build a strong foundation, then we can build up, right? Because you can build higher if you have a solid foundation. The same thing in our spirituality. That's what Noach had to build the world with, a solid foundation, wheat and bread, and it's referring to sustenance, things that sustain us, and that's referring to our spirituality, things that sustain us. We have to build on our prayer, and we have to build on our home and our kashrus and our Shabbos observance, and things that are our sustenance and our strength. And each one individually has things that are a little more easy that he or she could use as a foundation. These are things that we have to learn from this and grow from this, right, to be able to take that next step to the things that are a little more difficult, a little more harder for us, right, and sort of build that up. It's the same way we do that in a building, we have to do that in our spirituality also. So that's just another lesson to learn from this. Okay, now we're going to skip a little bit. The Torah goes through the different generations of man, right? It goes through the children of Ham, and then it goes through the children of his child Canaan, right? And then it goes to Shem Yulad, to Shem was built, right? And then it speaks about, it says in verse 11, page 48, right? Sorry, chapter 11, the seventh Aliyah, page 48, it says, V'hikol haaretz shafa echad. The whole world was one language, right? Imagine that. The interpreters will be out of business, right? So you didn't have to have any interpreters, right? There would definitely be no UN, right? The whole world was one language, spoke one language, with very machadim, and they had one common purpose. That sounds great, right? Wow, right? One language, one people, everything's great, right? And it says when they came from Kedem, and they said, it said, Hava lanu livnus. Let's go ahead and build bricks and fire to make stone. Right? It says in Vayomru Hava Navalanu Ir Migdal, verse 4. Let's build this massive city and a tower. Rosha Bashamayim, its head in the sky. Does it sound familiar? Now Dubai is building the biggest building, and then the Syria is building this building, China, this, or everybody's fighting for the tallest building in the world, right? Right? And we'll make a name, right? It means to say, and the Rashi quote says, it means to say, we'll go and fight with God, right? Right? That this will be something that we could go ahead and fight with God, that we never have problems of what happened before, right? So the commentaries explain before we this sort of giving a little. So this is called Dar Haflaga, right? Dar, the generation of Haflaga, of separation, right? Everybody they were all united. They were good. This is somewhere about 1,500 years or 1,700 years after the Mabul, right? We have a little less than that, probably about that. I have to look up the exact number, but after the Mabul, right? And they're saying they're scared that the Mabul is going to come again, even though God promised and it was passed down. A question in the sky is not, but they were scared that God's not going to keep his word, right? And God is going to destroy all of us. So he said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go and fight God. We'll build this thing up to the Shemaima, into the heavens, and then we'll go and we'll fight with God, right? That we should keep ourselves and we won't be destroyed anymore. It's a very fascinating thing, sort of along the lines that we were talking about before, right? I forgot who says this, if it's the Kli Yakar or the other commentaries, but they lived somewhere in the mid-1800s, right? But he says something very interesting, right? He says that, okay, so they're going to build something in the sky, but the sky is vast, and we know even then we know the sky is vast. So he says that they'll build a thing into the sky, and then they'll make a boat, and they'll sail, right? Sail to find God, right? But he says that they needed to build in the sky because they have to get out of the world, right? It doesn't go more into that. But again, this is talking in the 1800s, realizing that there's certain things of how to get out into the world, and you need a ship, things to fly. And again, we're not saying that he knew all the exactly, he didn't know rocket ships exactly, but again, a similar idea that we find that they asked these questions and spoke about these things. But back to a little, not saying that's not important, but a little more growth-oriented ideas for us from this thing. Well, what's going on here? Right? Why does the Torah have to go ahead and tell us that there are one language? What's the importance of that? Right? The Torah doesn't tell us in the days of the Dar HaMabul, flood, that they were one language. They were. Right? Because if there were one language now, of course, they're one language then. Right? So why does the Torah have to go ahead and tell us? And why does the Torah tell us that they had one mind? And that sounds like a good thing, right? Like they're all united, right? The UN would be great. I mean, one united thing. You don't even need a UN. It's one thing, right? You have all these like movies, like one nation takes over, the United World, whatever, right? Right, the Federation World, right? Everybody's a Star Trek fan here, right? Sorry, me too, right? But so like what that sounds like it's to be a good thing. What's the Torah? Why does the Torah have to mention this over here regarding that? Right? And what does God do? God says, "V'yed Hashem." God came down to see this, Liros to see it. Right? What Bnei Adam doing? V'yomer Hashem, and God said, "Hey, Am Echad v'Saf Echad." They're one nation and one language. Right? This is what's the problem. Last says, what are we going to do? Right? Let's come down. Have a Nair. We'll come down. V'nivla Sham Sfasim, and we'll separate their languages. And that's when the 70 languages were created. And the 70 language, right? The 70 prime languages, right? Shivim Lasanos, so 70 prime languages. Any language that we have now sort of comes off that, right? Those 70 languages. And at this point in time, that's before that, they all spoke Lashon HaKodesh. They all spoke one language, right? The Holy Tongue. This is when the 70 languages came. God said we're going to split them up and divide them, right? And then they won't be able to have this unity, right? And they won't be able to build it, right? That's why it's called Bavel. Yisam Bala Hashem Sfas Kalarts. That's why it's called Bavel, Babylon, right? Bavel, and that's where it was, right? Because Hashem Bala Hashem was Mevalvel. He confused, right, all the languages, and they couldn't. So one guy is all of a sudden he's speaking the Chinese. I don't know if Chinese was one of the 70s. It's not, but whatever he's speaking, they don't understand each other, and they didn't have interpreters yet, and because again they just got the different languages. Right? So they couldn't communicate to each other, and the whole thing fell apart. Right? That was a punishment. And that's how God destroyed it. Right? He destroyed the whole thing. So and then it says that Talmud tells us that the Dar HaFlaga doesn't have a reward in the world to come. They have no relationship with the world to come. But okay, what's going on here? It's it needs a lot of work. We don't have much time, and I apologize. Right, but it needs a lot of work. Right, what's going on over here? So the commentaries tell us that these two. There's really in the beginning of the parsha. There's the Dar, we call the Dar Mabul, the generation of the Mabul. And they did terrible things, right? They did terrible things. They adultery and stealing and just it was mushkas. It was there's no morality at all. There's no morality in the whole world, right? There's no morality. So God wipes it out, cleans it up, right? Okay, he promises not going to do it again. Next generation, no, they're getting together, right? They're kumbaya, right? Everybody, there's no stealing, there's no nothing. It sounds like a utopia, right? They have one language, right? They have one mind, right? They learned their lesson, right? But what do? They want to fight God. They want to fight God, right? So their sin is not believing in God, right? To the extent that they think they could fight God. They believe in God, that they could fight him, but they feel that they can fight God, and they don't believe that God's not going to destroy the world. So it says in the commentaries that this is really the extreme of two sides of two sides. And we always, Rambam says, Mamari says, we always have to live b'derech, we always have to live down the middle of the road. And he says this is really the extreme of two sides. Or what's this extreme? And it says the commentaries and I'm not going to say one specific person because many bring this out in different ways, that on one hand, right, on one hand, it's being separated and being you just caring about yourself and not caring about anybody else and whatever. That's terrible, right? The extreme, like Dharmabal, is terrible. You steal and you just take whatever you want, and there's no concept of privacy, right? There's no concept of ownership, right? There's no concept of caring about what other person thinks. You just do whatever the heck you want, right? And then the world fall apart. There's no morality to the world, right? But on the other hand, right? On the other hand, if everything's perfect and everybody's united in one front, and there's no diversity at all, there's no one questioning what you're doing, right? And there's no discussion about anything, and there's no way of talking it over. Then also you can become robots and become one-minded, and you're gonna to the extent that you go ahead and fight God, right? Exactly, and all of a sudden, like the Matrix, like robots. I mean, okay, I'm sorry, throwing a movie, right? But it's like you become like just against God, right? All united, yes. Wait, stop and think. Really, God promised. God created the world, right? Why God destroyed the world before? If He said He's not going to destroy the world, He's not going to destroy the world. And you really think that you could fight God with your spears and whatever? Maybe they had some magical, some witchcraft and things. Yes, we believe in that. Right? But you think you could go ahead and fight? Really, what are you thinking? But no, but they're all robotic. They're one-minded, one language, just doing the same thing. One person came with a mind. Yes, we're not going to be like we're one mind. We're together. We're doing this together. We can't argue with each other, right? We all have to believe the same thing. That's not healthy either. It's not healthy either. Right? And therefore, right, the Torah does not, we find many times, right, Avraham Avinu questions God, right? How am I going to know? And this and that. And, he has a discussion, right? It doesn't mean to say that he's arguing with God. You could have a balance of not arguing with the other person, but have a discussion with the other person. The Talmud is full of arguments. Right? The Talmud is full of machlokas, of arguments. Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, Rava, and Abaya, right? Rabbi Yochanan, Rosh Lakish, right? These are famous arguments and disagree on things. But they have a common goal. And they have a common goal of trying to find the truth. Right? They're trying to find the truth. So we can't be to the extreme. We can't be, no, there's just everybody do what the heck they want, whatever you want, no boundaries, no nothing, right? But also being just one-minded and not having your own thought, and just because because you're part of this, and then you be very careful what I'm saying now because there's elections in a few days, right? But because you have to follow third to May, you have to have your own thought too, right? You have to think about it. Let's just your family. My family has always. I read the story. I'm reading Rabbi Tzachar Fran right now, right? I read the story that he quotes that Rabbi Zev Leff, right? Rabbi Zev Leff is great. He lives in Eretz Yisrael now, but before that he lived in Cleveland, I think. No, Miami, right? He lived in Miami, right, or Hollywood, somewhere over there. He was a rabbi there, and he was giving one time a halacha shir. Right he gave a halacha shir, a short halacha between Mincha and Mariv, like a lot of places do. And one day there was someone that had yard sites, so he wasn't a regular person that came usually during the week, but he had yard sites, so he came to daven Mariv because that's when yard sites started. But he came a little early, so he was listening to the shir of Rav Zev Leff, and he was talking about the laws of Shabbos. Right? And I don't remember exactly what law it was that he was referring to, but he was talking about a certain law of Shabbos about squeezing something or bora, or I don't know exactly, there's certain laws of Shabbos. Right? And this guy, right, says, really? He's like, really? Yeah. I said, okay. After Meyer, he comes over to Rav Zev Leff, this can't be. What do you mean can't be? He says, because I'm Shomer Shabbos, and my father's Shomer Shabbos, and my grandfather's Shomer Shabbos, and my great-grandfather's Shomer Shabbos. I never heard this halacha before. Right? So therefore, it can't be you're making this up. It can't be that this is a halacha. Right? This is exactly what we're talking about, sort of just being closed-minded and this is my family, right? There's a similar concept, right? No, this is my family has been doing this like this, and therefore we're something, and it can't be. This is Abiferish halacha and Shulchan Aruch. Your rabbi is telling you that this is a halacha. So maybe your family didn't know about this halacha. Maybe over the generations it got forgotten. Maybe it wasn't something that happened so often, and therefore it wasn't talked about. right? But no, because you're going to be lashon echad, b'shafa echad, one language, one way of looking at things. This is what my family does, and that's the only way to do it. We can't be like that. We can't be like that. Right? That's what the Torah is telling us. And we find this and this, and I've had it many times. Right? I'm talking to someone, Rabbi, I'm just affiliated in a Reform community. I said, okay, so who cares? Let's talk. Let's just talk. I'm not telling you what to do. Let's just talk. Have a conversation. We cannot hinder ourselves with our growth, right? By just being one way. This is the way. This is my family. This is the community. This is how we vote. This is what we do. No, you have to question. Questions are the key to wisdom. Now, yes, you have to be seeking the truth, right? To be seeking the truth. And you have to be wanting an answer. And you have to be listening to an answer. You can't ask a question and then again still be going into your direction. No, it can't be. Right? I've had that. Ask a question, I give an answer. No, it can't be. Why not? It just can't be. But that's not an answer. Right? That's not an answer, it can't be. That's what the Torah is telling us, right? And this is, of course, the other one is also something that we have to think about. But I think it's not as prudent, at least in our communities, it is in our generation for sure. That we have to have boundaries, and we can't hefker and we can't just do whatever the heck we want. We can't be immoral. We can't just do whatever we want, and therefore, just okay. It's my body. I can do whatever I want. No, you can't. You can't. Right? There's laws and order. You can't go through a red light, right? Just like you can't. I want to go through a red light. I'm sorry, you can't. Right? So too, the Torah has laws. The Torah tells us how we should act. The Torah tells us what we should do, who we can marry, what we can do, what we can eat, what we can't eat, when we can eat, when we can't eat, what day we can eat, what day we can't eat. And that's just one thing. What we can do on Shabbat, what we can't do on Shabbat. The same way, it's 3:00 in the morning. You still can't go through the light. No one's looking. Too bad. There's still a law. And if there's a cop there, he'll pull you over. We can't just do what we want. That was the Dara Mabel. But also, we got to question. We got to reflect. And we can't just because we've been doing something our whole lives in a certain way means to say that that's what we have to do and we can't question. That's a Dara Flaga. And that's the two things. And that's why did God go ahead and change their languages? Why did God do that? And why does the Torah tell us? Because language is communication also. God said, no, you guys have to learn that you have to learn how to communicate otherwise. You have to question things, figure things out. Right? So therefore, that God created the 70 languages. There's also 70 levels of wisdom. Right? 70 languages is to tell us, and no, we have to go ahead and we have to reflect. We have to learn. Can't all this, the whole world be one way, and then this is what we do. So we always do it. Everybody does it. So everybody does that. Just because everybody does that doesn't mean to say it's right. And I always told my kids, if everybody jumped off a roof, will you jump off a roof? That is not funny, right? But just because everybody does it doesn't mean to say it's the right thing. And so we'll just the end of this week's parsha, then it goes ahead again, the 10 generations from Noach until Abraham Avinu. Then the end of this week's parsha speaks about Avraham Avinu being an Ur Kasdim, right? We don't really have time, we're already over our time, I apologize, right? But Avraham Avinu in Ur Kasdim, right? Going to the furnace, right? Hopefully we'll talk about that a little more when we speak about Avraham Avinu. Thank you so much for joining us. Everybody have a wonderful evening.